Good evening, and welcome to Unity Books Presents. I'm Ellen Debenport. I'm the Vice President of Publishing for Unity World Headquarters. And tonight we're talking with the authors of our latest book, Linda Martella-Whitsett and DeeAnn Morency. It's great to see both of you.
Lovely to see you, Ellen.
The book is Discover Your Divinity, a modern guide to affirmative prayer. This is the first book Unity has published about prayer in 10 years, I think, and the first how-to prayer book in about 40 years. Linda and DeeAnn have been telling me this book was really needed, that people were clamoring for this information. The book came out 2 weeks ago. I haven't had a chance to tell you all this. We ordered the second printing today. So you were right. There is a need for this book out there.
Wow.
Those of you who want the book, note it is not on Amazon yet. That always takes a few weeks, but it is on Kindle and it's on unity.org in the online store. They'll be putting the link in the chat. So quick introduction. Linda and DeeAnn are both Unity ministers. Linda lives in Florida. She retired this year as the head of the Unity prayer ministry called Silent Unity. Doesn't mean she's sitting still. She is even busier now as a speaker, teacher, workshop leader, and author. Linda, this is your fourth book?
Fourth. Mm-hmm.
Wow. DeeAnn is the senior minister at Unity in Marin, California. And every time I say that, I want to say, what a tough assignment you have. But I guess someone has to share the message of unity between the Golden Gate Bridge and the wine country.
Yeah, it's a really tough job.
I hope you enjoy it. We're just jealous. So we're so glad all of you are here tonight. I'll be asking Linda and DeeAnn more about their backgrounds in a minute, but I want to just jump right into the book and start with a high-level overview. We have an hour or so to talk about this. It is, you'll be able to tell, it's unscripted and unrehearsed. And while you're watching, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We will try to take some questions, maybe as we go along, but for sure at the end. I know some of you are very familiar with Unity and others not. So if anything is unclear, please just put a question in the chat. And the moderators can answer it or they can funnel questions to us. So, book overview, Discover Your Divinity, a modern guide to affirmative prayer. It's a book about prayer, but that's a huge topic. I mean, prayer is practiced by billions of people all over the world. So what specifically about prayer did you want to say? Well, let's start with Linda.
Ooh, we have a lot to say about prayer. What I think, I'm not going to speak for DeeAnn, but I know in our conversations, DeeAnn and I have both recognized as being teachers in the field over the last decade and a half. You know, I've had a lot of conversation, a lot of time to talk with people about prayer and listen for what's happening in the field around prayer. And all I can tell you is that everyone from students to leaders sharing, and everyone has their own way of praying, even though we say there's a unity way of praying. And it just seemed to me that I feel like I was missing. It's why I wrote books, because I felt like I was missing, like, what is this really about? You know, when I read about Myrtle talking about prayer being empowering, right? You live the truth. I wanted more of that in prayer. For me, the whole book is about clarifying the unique and transformational power that unity prayer has for the world.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. I mean, I think for me, affirmative prayer is the greatest gift that I believe that New Thought has given to the world. And as I moved, so I started at Agape. So I come out of a CSL background and then moved into the Unity movement, which has been such a gift. I love Unity, but I did notice that there was a lot of different ways that people were praying, and there wasn't a lot of coherence. And I found that there also wasn't a lot of material directly related to Unity that was modern, that was for an everyday person, that I wasn't, when I was teaching, having to translate into a language that students today could actually understand. And so in some ways, this book began because there was I felt, for me, there was this lack of material, and I kept creating material, and Linda and I kept connecting over the material that we were both creating, and decided that a book was important, really important, and to inspire the next generation of Unity to be able to sort of bring this into the next century and beyond.
So what do you want people to take from it? Or maybe a better question is, how do you want them to use this book?
I think that empowerment piece that Linda spoke to, at least for me, is really the heart of it all. I see affirmative prayer as being about healing. It's a healing process. It's a healing and transformational process. And to have something that enables you to feel the spiritual authority that is our birthright, to be able to activate that in a very concrete way, I know personally changed my life. It transformed my life. And so that spiritual empowerment, and to be able to understand how prayer is an avenue, a beautiful avenue for our own growth and transformation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow. And taking off from there, because everything that you just said, DeeAnn, is exactly the way I have experienced it. It was such a wow for me to really connect spiritual principles with the sort of the muddiness of God, right? God is so much that to be able to define the indefinable in some way that becomes useful to me, it just changed everything for me about how prayer could actually benefit me, you know. But for me, what I'm most excited about this, and you both know this, is wow, to have a training for all the leaders of prayer in ministries, to have something that, you know, our prayer teams can study together and build skill with, help them to grow their consciousness collectively and individually, to be able to support on the ground, like one-on-one, to be able to pray, not just effectively. You know, we, from doing so much prayer training over the years, you know, the biggest thing I always hear is I really just don't know. I go from my head to my heart and I talk, and that's all I know to do. Well, we have some education through this book that will help them to understand, why do I do what I do? And why do we say what we say in prayer? And really as a guide that will help prayer leaders, prayer individuals relax when they go, because their consciousness and skill will be so clarified that they can pray with that spiritual authority and make such a difference for themselves as well as for those they pray with. That's what excites me. You can't tell, I know.
Yeah, you can tell. I was the editor on this book, and I can tell you it is full of lists and bullet points and examples and practices, and here's how to do it, and here's what to say. And so it's almost like a prayer manual, although it also goes into the philosophy behind affirmative prayer and how that all works. But let me ask this. I've always heard there's no right or wrong way to pray, but it sounds like you have a really specific way to pray. Is this just for Unity people?
You know, Ellen, that's such a great question. And it was one of the questions that Linda and I kept wrestling with, you know, who is this book for? And first and foremost, it is for our Unity community. And I passionately believe that this is a lot of, particularly the more progressive Christian traditions have absorbed a lot of new thought ideas, and they incorporate them into their teachings. And the one thing that we don't see anywhere else is affirmative prayer. That is something that is still uniquely new thought. It still stays here, and I'm a big one of like, why should it stay here? Let's share this with everyone. That this book was written to be accessible for prayer chaplains and ministers, and to be useful for prayer chaplains. They were very present for both Linda and I as we were writing this. And we also were being very aware that there are people who may have never heard of affirmative prayer before at all. And they had no background, no history, no anything. And how do we create an avenue for them to be able to step in to this really powerful prayer process, which there is no wrong way to pray. And Unity has a very powerful, unique way to pray. So nowhere are we saying that you can only pray this way, but what we are saying is that affirmative prayer, when you practice it, offers something that I personally have never experienced in any other prayer practice, and I have tried a lot of them. And it creates and opens up possibilities in a way that the invitation is to explore and to dance with it and to play with it and see what you can unlock within yourself.
Yeah. So this is the overview. We'll get into more specifics later. But Linda, we already have a question from one of your fans. How is this different from your first book, How to Pray Without Talking to God?
Very good, very good. Well, that book was written a dozen years ago, and I've evolved quite a lot since then. Have you guys? Have you all evolved in your understanding? And so that book was due for an update anyway. Now, that book still has a lot of value for people as a primer, as an entree into, like, sort of stepping over a bridge from maybe a more traditional understanding of God and of the nature of self, and then how do you pray? So it's very good introductory for someone, especially someone who's coming out of a more traditional faith into Unity. That will help them. There's really good work in there about denial and affirmations, which we also cover in the new book, but we've changed the word denial to negation. Why? To get around that nasty word denial that has such a different connotation today than probably when Charles Fillmore used that language over 100 years ago. But anyway, the book is still relevant, but I would always point someone who wants to learn the specifics, because we go into great detail about how prayer moves and each of the movements of prayer in the flow of prayer. And that's the deeper training that you're going to get in this new book.
Right. And we'll talk about all of that. We're already getting demands for examples of affirmative prayer. So we will do that. We're also getting lots of comments in the chat. Thanks to our chat moderators for letting us know. And people who've already got the book and love it. So your fans are watching.
Good. So when it gets on Amazon, we're going to ask you, write a review on Amazon, please, so that other people might find something in what you say to choose that book too. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that was a good plug. But yes, we want Amazon reviews. So, but before we get really down into what is affirmative prayer and how do you build an affirmative prayer and what are the affirmations behind it, how did each of you get interested in prayer? DeeAnn, you can start that.
Sure. I honestly can say that affirmative prayer saved my life. I was in the darkest night of the soul. And I truly did not see any way out of that dark night of the soul. And I was attending CSL. And while the teachings were resonating on some level, they weren't really getting to the place of despair and hopelessness that I was living in. And in total frustration, one day I went and got prayer. And I had never experienced anything like that, where what this prayer practitioner did was not, she listened to me. She listened to my whole sob story. She listened to all of it. And then she completely didn't believe it. She didn't believe my hopelessness. She didn't believe that I had nowhere to go. She didn't believe that I had no real community. She didn't believe any of the story that I was so enmeshed in that I couldn't see past it. And as she did her prayer and just kept affirming what she knew to be the truth of my being, something awoke within me, because it was truth, like the truth that she was speaking. She was so clear. There was no doubt in her mind about what she was seeing, about the truth of who I was. And that clarity, her spiritual authority, ignited something within me. And I remember sitting back and for the first time feeling hope, feeling that there was something else possible, that I had given up. I had given up thinking that there was anything like that. And it began a deep and powerful healing process. That affirmative prayer became my go-to practice. It became how I stepped into my wholeness in a way that I had never imagined before. I was actually able to track her down like 5 years later. She had no memory of me whatsoever. Of course. And, but I was able to say thank you because she started me on my journey of ministry. Ultimately, that prayer ignited something so powerful within me.
Okay, Linda.
So repeat the question, please.
The question is, how did you get interested in prayer?
Oh, well, I was a Unity minister. And that's when I really started working with prayer process. I had all the training in prayer, and I was praying in my congregation, and I started to feel uncomfortable with the way I had internalized and was repeating prayer as I was hearing it, right? As I saw it modeled for me. And there was a lot of addressing a Father, Mother, God, addressing Sweet Holy Spirit, or even, Heavenly Father and things like that was going on. And I was trying to map that out along with what I was also hearing in unity. There's only one power, one presence. And I'm one with that power and presence. How could there be an other? How could there be an other? So anyway, I was floundering myself, and I was having a hard time feeling like I could authentically stand and pray. So I started studying out of desperation. I mean, I was losing my God. I was losing that traditional understanding of the nature of God, and I just dove in for my own benefit, And then it just led me to develop like a study guide for my spiritual community in San Antonio, to study this also and to give it more thought. That turned into an SEE class on prayer, and eventually my first book. And I just became consumed with it because I was learning so much that was so freeing to me, to see that prayer isn't about getting God's attention or having God act. It was about me saying yes to the potential that I am. It's about me being willing, to become an embodiment of spiritual power in a way that makes a definite difference right there in the circumstance that I've been praying about. Oh, just the thrill of that. So for me, it was out of a need to grow quickly. I mean, like I needed something quick that I could apply,
Yeah. So how did you end up teaching together? Because you live on opposite sides of the country.
We might have a different story to tell on that. I'm not sure, but can I tell?
You can tell it, Linda.
Oh, it was just so awesome. So I was, of course, giving a tour actually to DeeAnn's ministerial class in Silent Unity. It was before the pandemic, so people were still coming to campus for that. One of the last classes, maybe, right? And here comes this tall, bold, red-headed, curly-haired woman, and she came right up to me, and she almost pointed her finger at me. She didn't do that really, but she was so direct and looked at me. She said, "I want to work with you. I get what you're doing, and I want to work with you." And I said, "Okay." And so I invited her to start, for us to start working on curriculum. That was it.
Yeah, no, I have the same
6 years, 5.5 years.
You remember it too?
Hey, look, you asked, I say yes. And then she proved it to me. I mean, she showed up and, we actually were able to move through this. It was exciting.
We didn't start off writing a book. Let's put it that way. We didn't start off with the writing of a book being the intention or the goal. It was really actually more about curriculum. It was about the frustrations we were both experiencing in trying to teach affirmative prayer and not really feeling as if we had material. I just kept feeling like I was creating a wheel. I was like, I feel like I'm creating a wheel. How do we streamline this? How do we make this more accessible for people? How do we help people move out of their head around affirmative prayer and actually be in the embodied place of it, but have consciousness and intention around what it is that affirmative prayer is? And that's what started the whole process. And then we realized at some point, I kept saying to Linda, I think this is a book. And then she reached out to me at one point and said, it's a book.
It's a book. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great segue, because here's the question. What is affirmative prayer?
We have
wants to go
pages we wrote about it.
We have a whole chapter on that.
Explain it to the people who are watching who don't know, haven't run into this before.
Yeah.
What makes a prayer affirmative and what isn't an affirmative prayer?
Well, that would start by just understanding what affirmation is. So an affirmation is a statement of what is true. So many people think an affirmation is more like saying what you want to have happen as if it already has happened. I mean, that's part of I think the common understanding of that in just in the general public. But for Unity, that affirmation has been, what do I know that is absolute truth that I can relate to right now, right? And so that's the basis for affirmative prayer. And so basically what we do, affirmative prayer is a methodology for transforming the way we have been thinking about and dealing with our circumstance, whatever it is we want to pray about. Affirmative prayer is a pathway to be able to shift our thinking and therefore our way of interacting or of working with whatever's going on in our lives. I mean, that's in a nutshell, that's the purpose of affirmative prayer. It's the ability to recognize something of the power of the divine and to be able to name it something specific that we can recognize and that we can then integrate into our own self, and we can be able to claim it and say, well, that's my nature, right? Because God and I are one. So that's what I am. Now, what can I do with that? I mean, that's affirmative prayer in a nutshell. God is ... identifying something of that power, saying that means that I am that, that's my nature as well. And therefore, I can do something different. I can think differently about this. I can take some different action that is in alignment with that principle or that power. That's the nutshell version of what affirmative prayer is and has to offer.
Yeah, the only thing I would clarify, because I think that was beautifully said, Linda, is that this is a process, a purposeful, conscious decision to be changed. that affirmative prayer is, when you're stepping into a practice of affirmative prayer, you are stepping into a practice that is willing to acknowledge that you have lost sight of spiritual truth in this moment, and that you are purposefully saying, I am aligning myself with the truth of who I am. And in that realignment, or remembering to remember our divine truth, then we can then engage in our, the whole point of our book in a lot of ways is about how do we actualize the prayer in time and in space? How do we keep it not just being this idea, this lovely love is here and love is wonderful and love makes everything just rosy and fabulous, which may feel really good. But what does that mean when I step back into the world? How am I changed, and how am I showing up as love? And that's that piece of realization, which is, everything in the movements, the 5 movements, everything is building to realization, to realizing something about yourself, and about the truth that is, and what that means that you now can be and do and have and know in time and in space. And that's the transformational power, is not just remembering that God is love, but remembering that because God is love, I can show up in all of my relationships as a harmonizing power and presence. I can remember, no matter how angry people may be, that love is the very essence of what is happening, and respond from that place of love. It empowers us in a really, really incredible way to be changed. And affirmative prayer changes us. I mean, I think that's also the biggest difference affirmative prayer is to other prayer practices. Other prayer practices are trying to change God. And in affirmative prayer, we are changing the fact that we have forgotten that we are and what we are capable of and what we have available to us and what's accessible to us.
Wow.
I'm not passionate about this at all, Ellen.
Yeah. So let's say I come to you and I've just been diagnosed with something scary and I'm terrified. How do you pray that makes it an affirmative prayer?
That's a great question. We have a whole section on what we call spiritual malpractice.
No, not malpractice. I'm still looking for examples of affirmative prayer.
Right.
What makes it affirmative?
For most people, when I come with a prayer like that, I'm coming because what is it I want? I want this cured. I want to be cured. I want this to go away. I want it to be done with, right? And so my thought behind that prayer is, I just want to be better. I just want to, this. I want to be cured, right? And we'll say I want to be healed, but we really want to be cured. Right. We want the disease to be gone. So in affirmative prayer, we're not praying for a specific outcome. And this is one of the biggest challenges, because people's like, but that's what I want. So I want you to pray about that. But what we understand about affirmative prayer is that the consciousness of what is real and true about me, what's the truth about me, that's what I want to shift. Because if my circumstances have a chance of improving or correcting or changing or modifying or whatever I would want for them, it's my consciousness that helps to create the environment in which that becomes possible. And so here's the thing is that what I do, because I would do it for myself as well, that I would remind you, I would tune into, what do we know about the divine? Well, we know that's the field of wholeness, that's the realm of perfect life, right? Of perfect life. And so what do I know? I know that you can't be separate from God. And so I know about you that life is your real name, your truth, right? The truth of you, that wholeness is what you are, that you might feel very well broken right now. You might feel something is really wrong and amiss, but we're going to broaden our lens to see the truth about you, the truth about that atmosphere of the divine in which all is whole and all things work together. And so then I'm going to remind you, Ellen, and whoever you're speaking for right now, I'm going to remind you that life that you see is divine is what you are. It's the truth about you. You can't be separate from the nature of the divine. And so all that you can say that God is right now is your nature. And so we're going to invite you to say to yourself, I am wholeness. I am life. That's the truth about me that I want to know. And if that's really hard to do, I can go a little bit softer on that, but still say the truth and say, every cell in my body is thrumming with life right now. And I'm going to just now be a partner. So now I'm into realization. Now I'm like, okay, if I know that every cell is alive and doing its perfect work right now, what's my job now? In realization, it's to foster that. It's like what our co-founder in Unity, Myrtle Fillmore, said, I talked to my body, right? I'm going to nurture my body along. I'm going to envision that life just, doing the healing work that it's always about doing, what to support me. And so, and why is that helpful? Because now my attention is on life. My attention is on well-being and thriving in that. My attention's not on how awful this disease is and will it just go away, right? I'm not dissociating from myself. I am in myself, accepting, asking you, inviting you to accept that wholeness is my true name. And let me just focus my attention on aligning with the principle of life. Every day, how am I going to live well today? How am I going to be on the side of life today as I go through the healing process of this disease, working through me or whatever, right? As I do what I need to do in the material sense of things, what am I going to do spiritually? How am I going to think?
Wow. I mean, we have to remember that what we know and believe in unity is that what we place our attention upon grows in consciousness. So when we are mired in the trauma and the difficulty and the hardship and the whatever that narrative becomes, that continues to grow in our consciousness. And what affirmative prayer offers us is a way to shift our attention to something that is absolute within us, that cannot ever be touched by cancer. The truth of who we are can never be touched by cancer. And so when we anchor that for ourselves, it enables us to now live into the world and into this experience of cancer. Because nowhere in this book are we saying that we're denying, that's why we don't use the word denial, denying the power, the impact, or the hardship, or how challenging life can be. But what we are inviting people to do is to bring that hardship and that heartache and all of that into the prayer field, and to know that truth will always bring us comfort. Truth will always support vitality and energy and passion, and there is nothing greater than truth. And so what the prayer process allows us to do is to live our best life right now. Right now.
We have a question in the chat from someone who says, okay, so once you've constructed a good affirmative prayer, how often do you keep praying?
My general rule of thumb for this, because I get this question a lot, is, do you feel changed? Affirmative prayer is to change something about your own understanding about yourself or the situation or God and so at the end of the prayer, if you feel changed, then live it. And that's answered prayer. You're living into it is the answered prayer. And then you might discover that something else arises, and you can bring part of what what I have found for myself with affirmative prayer is that it has invited a way for me to be completely 100% honest with myself about what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing. I'm not afraid of my grief anymore. I'm not afraid of my hopelessness anymore. I'm not afraid of any of that anymore, because I know that I have a gift that will support me to realign myself. And so because I'm not afraid of it anymore, I can bring it into the prayer field again and again and again. And I get to know myself better. I get to understand the truth of who I am better. And I become more compassionate for myself in the process. So keep doing the prayer. And we also have a thing in there, if you're not feeling like you changed, try something else. Try a different quality of the divine, try a different power, try and see if maybe it's really not about, peace that you want, but maybe it's really strength. Maybe strength is the thing that you're actually needing to rediscover that is the truth of who you are, so that you can show up in the world with that capacity. And that may ultimately bring you more peace. But so the point would be to experiment until you feel like something shifts within you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The thing is that your circumstances are moving. Your consciousness is shifting. Your experience of what you're experiencing changes. Our emotions come and go. So, when it's not that we say the same prayer again and again and again like a lucky charm. That's not the point of repetition, but to pray again with a new thought of, what am I feeling now that's different from the last time I entered the prayer field. And so let me think about that, get a prayer partner, that could help with that as well. Right. So, I love it, though, because prayer is a practice. It's a practice. And so, only how is that practice bearing fruit? Are you? And so an answered prayer, I love what you said, DeeAnn, an answered prayer is you understanding, how am I going to move forward now? Now that I've prayed, what's the action that I'm going to take? That saying, pray and move your feet. What are you going to do now? Right. So that prayer doesn't just turn into just, some magical incantation. Right.
Yeah. Right. All right. So you all have created 5 movements of prayer. You don't call them steps. They are movements. So would you just walk us through what the 5 movements are? Maybe start with why you call them movements.
Yes. We had a lot of fun at a Unity convention when we first were conceptualizing this, and we were thinking about what's happening. Well, prayer is moving. I mean, if I don't go somewhere in prayer, why have I bothered praying? I mean, if nothing's going to change, why bother praying? So we understood that prayer is moving, and we ended up conceptualizing prayer as a spiral, as a spiraling out in consciousness, right? You'll see that on the cover of the book. You'll see the image here, right, of the fern frond that starts out sort of embryonic and then it blossoms and opens. The same with the nautilus shell. It's the spiral. So we had this imagery before we had the words. We had this imagery of, you start with some kind of tension, right? When you've got a prayer need, there's a tension there. And so then the movements are for us to open. That's the first movement. I'll start there, and then DeeAnn can take the next one. But we have to open. If I never open, I'm not going to go anywhere, right? So that's the first thing, is to become willing to open my heart, open my mind. And then that little opening is where now I start moving through a process so that I can then expand consciousness, which is, of course, where we want to go with prayer. So that's why we express them as movements, because we are going somewhere.
And they also didn't feel linear. Steps just felt very sort of linear. And we worked from our experience of impactful, empowering prayer. We worked backwards from that. That's actually how Ernest Holmes created the CSL model. Was he first just did what he did, and then he worked backwards from it. And in some ways we were doing the same thing. We were like, what's actually happening in order for our prayers to be impactful? And so the eye opening, it's like, okay, so I'm open to a new understanding. I'm open to possibility. I'm open to something bigger than what I can see personally, DeeAnn can see. And so the next step is to go as big as possible in some ways, right? To just recognize that God is, to remind ourselves that there is that which is the one power, the one presence, the one life, the one being that is everywhere presence, that is all consciousness, that is everywhere-ness. And from that place of God is, pick one or two. And we really try to say to people, you just need one or two. You don't need all 12 powers, or, one or two is enough. And just pick one or two qualities, powers of God that I often describe it as that feel like the antidote to the condition that you're started with. What is it that you're being invited to bring to this that is a God quality? And it might be love, it might be joy, it might be strength or zeal, right? It's what is it that would actually allow me to navigate what I am in the midst of? Wholeness, or right. And from that place, we have this really, I often say to people, it's so wonderful to know that there's only one power and one presence, but I don't know how to use that. I don't know if you know how to use that, but I don't know how to use that in my life. And so we bring it into these qualities, and then we say, I am that. And we call it integration because it's about, we call ourselves divinely human. We never want to cut off our humanness. It's important, it's valid, it's beautiful. And so the integration is this opportunity to be able to be the divine human, to be able to be the I am, and to understand something, and to actually also still know that we exist in time and space, because we do, right? We do. And then that brings us, and I'm going to throw it back to Linda, to the next movement, which would be, I can't, therefore, right? When I remember and I'm integrated, therefore.
And before we get to therefore, we're just going to highlight that movement of I am. It's the hardest part of prayer. It's the hardest part to swallow that, right? To agree, to come into agreement with that, to come to really real, true understanding of that, not as an egotistical claim, but as a requirement in order for me to act powerfully in my life, right? And so that I am leads us to say, if that's the truth, if that's the nature of God, and if this is what therefore I am, what can I do with that? How do I actually use that in my life? And, despite the fact that, that prayer often leaves us feeling a sense of, comfort or that kind of thing, if we don't have marching orders at the end of prayer, what are we going to do when that worry comes back 2 hours from now, right? Or tomorrow morning when I have to go and then live my life? So to get some clarity about what do I do differently, I'm just going to give you an example because I think it really helps to have an example, right? So say I've had a dispute with my neighbor. This is a common example I use because it was one example that from my own life, right? There was some issue about the shared fence line with my neighbor, right? And I walked away from our interaction feeling like it had been an altercation and feeling like, oh my gosh, this person's not going to work with me. And I just had all kinds of imaginings about how awful this person was and what a terrible neighbor and, all the snarkiness of my thoughts about this other person. And so entering the prayer field with that, I knew my own emotions around that. And I knew that's not how I want to be in life. It doesn't feel good. I don't like feeling the way I'm feeling. And so what can I do about it? And so, of course, I turned my mind toward the harmony of divine love, right? God is love, which one of its aspects is harmony. And so I claimed harmony is my name. It's my nature. It's what I am. And of course it is. And I know that because I feel horrible when I feel out of harmony. How about you? I mean, that's one of the ways I know that that's my divine nature, right? So I take hold, I say, okay, harmony. And so when I allow myself to receive that as an instruction for how I am, who I am, now I say, well, what do I do differently now if I'm harmony? Well, the first thing I had to do was clean up my own thoughts. I had to harmonize my disharmonious thoughts. And I had to think very differently about the situation and about my neighbor. And I had to come clean with myself with an open heart, have a clean heart, right? Where I no longer had nasty things going on in my brain when I thought about my neighbor. And I cleaned it up to neutralize that and came to a recognition that my neighbor only wants what I want, which is to have this settled and have it work well and all that. We want things to be well. Let me approach it that way. And so then I started thinking about how might I approach my neighbor differently about this. And it led me to really be conscious about how do I bring harmony. Now, it doesn't mean that my neighbor has to accept that or change in their actions or whatever, but if it's going to be different, it's sure going to help that I'm different, right? That I've got that understanding. And so I could leave that prayer feeling such relief because oh, I know who I am again. I know my nature. I know what's mine to do. And now I can proceed really just with confidence in that. It sounds so simple and clear, and it can be that clear. It just can be that clear and simple.
So within the 5 movements of prayer, we've had I open to new possibilities. I recognize that God is. And then this one was I integrate I am.
And then I realize that I can, because that's the part I just described. I can think differently about this. I can approach the neighbor differently, right? That's realization, making it real in time and space.
All right. So I open, I recognize, I integrate, I realize, and what's the 5th one?
So
I appreciate.
Appreciation. And here's the distinction with that Linda and I really are clear about. That what the appreciation is about how we were changed. The appreciation is for the new way that we can move into the world, for the new understanding that we have. Again, this goes back to the idea that we become our own answered prayer when we remember the truth of our being. So we're appreciating the fact that we have a new way of engaging with the neighbor. We have a new way to be confident and to be centered in who we truly are, rather than living from who we are not. Mm-hmm. And so the appreciation isn't about appreciating what we think is coming or what we hope is coming. Mm-hmm. The appreciation is for the realization that happened right now, that we are in the midst of in that moment. The thing that I really like to stress about affirmative prayer is it's only happening in the present tense. It's happening now because it's happening where it happens is in our own consciousness, and it's happening in the present moment, not in the future, and right now. So the appreciation is for right now, right? The gift, the new awareness right now.
So if you are watching this and wishing you could just be in a class where these two are teaching, you can. 4 Tuesday nights in October, they'll be teaching an advanced prayer training online. So you can join from anywhere. And I think the chat moderators will tell you how to sign up for that. Because, I've known you both forever, and I still get blown away by your brilliance when you talk about these things. But I want to talk about prayers not being answered, air quotes. When I think of answered prayer, I think of God out there either giving me what I want or not. Mm-hmm. So it was answered or it wasn't. And you've got a whole chapter about prayer seeming not to work. It doesn't work. It doesn't demonstrate. It doesn't manifest. So why don't we always get what we pray for?
Mm. It's a great question. So going back to the idea that where prayer is happening is in our own consciousness, we get to be invited into an understanding of what can be an impediment to our own consciousness. It's really the place. So sometimes it's that we're being too specific about what we're praying about. There's that joke about the flood is happening, and the guy says, a car comes along and says, "Get in, we'll take you to safety." And he says, No, I prayed to God, and God's going to give me a miracle. And the flood levels rise, and the boat comes and says, "We'll take you to safety." And he says, No, I prayed to God, and God is going to give me a miracle. And the helicopter comes, and he says, No. And then he dies, and he goes to the pearly gates, and he says, "God, where's my miracle?" And he's like, "I sent you a boat, a car, and a helicopter. What more did you want?" And sometimes we're so fixated on what we think our answered prayer should be that we are missing all that is right now available to us. So we can be too limited in what it is that we are seeking. And then the opposite is true. We can be too vague. Paul Hasselbeck always says, what happens in vagueness stays in vagueness. And that is so true for affirmative prayer, that if the prayer is vague, then it may feel super yummy, but there's no forward momentum that happens, that you are activated as you move through your life differently.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why to eradicate vagueness is why we invite claiming a particular power, right? Because God is so big. God is all that is. It's allness. And how do you use that? What do you do when you say, well, God is here in this situation? Okay, so now what do I do? What do I do? Right? How do I live into that? So that more specificity really helps us to be able to make a claim of our own divine identity. Another thing that I have found a big factor in my life, and we write about this also in this same chapter you're referring to, Ellen, is the influence of the collective consciousness can be very strong. And when we say that, it's like every one of us were patterned with a way of thinking about how life works and what we can have and what we can't. And I mean, I know a lot of us, people of my age, were raised by parents coming out of the Great Depression. There was a lot of fear about money and prosperity. And so I got a lot of those messages as a young girl. I would hear it all the time. We can't afford this, or, what do you think? Money grows on trees. And I mean, I had a whole litany of phrases that really were relative to that. So it's no surprise that then in my adulthood, without connecting those two things until I learned more about it, right, by continuing to study, that I was operating with those things still under the surface affecting me. And I was terrified every time I had to go and pay bills. I always was worried I wouldn't have enough. And, so that could be true in all manner of things, right? That we could have a lot of bodies of thoughts about aging, for example. That's a big topic when I'm talking to people now today. And there's a whole collective consciousness around what aging it looks like and what's inevitable about aging and these kinds of things. And it could scare us. It could really scare us. And so one of the things that one of our cautions is to be able to pay attention for whether I'm believing something that isn't my own belief, but it was given to me and I'm just operating from it without thinking about it. And if I can bring it to the conscious level, I can challenge that belief and I can think again about it, right?
Right.
And I often say to people that if you feel as if whatever it is that you are looking to demonstrate and manifest, that it feels like you feel like Sisyphus trying to push a boulder up the hill, that often is, for me, when I experience that, I become very aware of how I am actually, it's collective consciousness. I'm not just shifting and moving me. I am in the midst of something that is impacting because there is only one, and consciousness is only one consciousness. And so I find great comfort in that sometimes when I'm feeling tired, to just know that there are other people out there who are doing the work with me, and that we are together collectively looking to shift and up-level collective consciousness. And I find that that can be a way to shore myself up and to be compassionate with myself with when I feel as if things are stuck. There's also something we talk about called the energy hump, which is just that moving from a divine idea into something that demonstrates in time and in space requires energy. There's an energy output that has to happen. And it's a good thing, because as I like to say, if every thought we had manifested, my brother would have been dead many times over. So the energy hump is a gift because it asks us to really get clear about something. And then the last thing I would just say is, when I have experienced that answered prayer isn't being answered, I often really just take a look at what it is that I'm asking for, and is it something that I'm still on some level expecting some magical something to swoop in, the fairy godmother to wave a wand and everything is going to be okay? And how am I abdicating my own spiritual authority? Where am I not actually standing in my own spiritual authority? And that to me is also that's what I mean. This is a process of personal transformation, because as you dance with this practice, you start to see the places where you're stuck. You start to see the beliefs that you carry that are interfering with the life that you want to be living. And what I then say is just bring it all that, whatever's coming up, bring it back to the prayer field. All your frustration, all your doubts, all your confusion, all your, I'm not good enough, I'll never be able to pray, I'm horrible at this, bring it to the prayer field. So that you can, even if it feels tight, that you can open into that prayer flow and know the truth of your being.
Yeah. And this is why it really helps to do some study, right? To get some education, to work with someone who's already got some to work with, go to a prayer partner in your community or something like that. The challenge is the word answered prayer really does, as you started out, Ellen, saying, it conjures the idea that prayer is answered somewhere else and it's just given to us. And that's part of what we think of as magical thinking, right? And that's the other problem, is that it doesn't feel like my prayer's been answered if I don't get what I want. And if we could dispel any mythology around prayer tonight, that would be the thing I would invite. And it's a big thing to swallow if that's really an unfamiliar concept to you, to say, if what I wanted doesn't occur, then that meant that God said no, or that meant that my prayer was not answered. And our challenge is that you are the answer to your prayer. And we say that, again, not as an egotistical claim, but as the thought that I grasp a new understanding of my life, and then I live differently because I have prayed. And so that in that, I become the answer to my prayer. I answer the prayer with my action, with my changed way of living. I think differently, I speak differently, and behave differently because of it.
And you could say, too, that the God that I am, the divinity that I am, is answering the prayer, right? Not a God out there answering the prayer, but the divinity that I am is answering the prayer.
So in the chat, someone says, so we should keep praying when prayers are unanswered. I've already prayed for over 15 years.
Well, here's where I would recommend that you work with someone who has some skill in Unity's form of affirmative prayer, and to get some new strategy around prayer, because again, as we say, prayer becomes a practice, and the practice of this prayer methodology puts the seed of action in our hands. When I pray, I then have a new a new way of acting when that prayer is over. And it's my change, my transformed thought, right? Be renewed by the, what is it? Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. That's what prayer is. It's the renewal of our mind. It's our grasping an understanding that we didn't have even moments before. And I'll tell you the truth, I don't have that understanding when I'm worried about one of my children. I'm a mom, right? And so when one of my kids is hurting, I'm in pain and I feel helpless as I could be. And anyone who's got a loved one that's ever had any troubles, you know what I'm talking about. You feel really helpless. And I cannot, it's so hard to get through that. And that's where I go to a prayer partner and I ask someone to pray with me, to remind me of the truth, that I know my greatest gift that I can be to that loved one at that time is a clear consciousness, is the harmony, is the knowledge of their divinity, and to be able to then hold them in the light of wholeness, to hold them, to see the truth about them, as DeeAnn said her prayer partner did for her that many years ago. And that, that's, we all need that at times. I mean, I don't care how good you get at praying. Sometimes I need a God with skin on, right? Sometimes I need somebody to remind me of the truth so that I can snap out of the emotions that are really have been going on under the surface.
There was a question earlier, Linda, that you wanted to address, and I want to hear you address it. This person said, I have some difficulty with proclamations that prayer works, or that our prayer team has produced results by praying over people's requests. Yeah. I tend to think we're helping people open channels that are already there, rather than making them get that job or heal that illness.
Yeah. Her second part of the second part of her chat message really kind of clarified, because yes, I have the same discomfort, to tell you the truth, listener, that same discomfort. And I know we do this, and even in the prayer ministry, I mean, people like to celebrate an answered prayer. And what it is not an answered prayer. It's a conclusion that they wanted. That's really what we're talking about. An answered prayer is, I got what I asked for. I got what I wanted. And of course, we're excited about that when somebody gets what they wanted, or when somebody's illness has been resolved, when, somebody's lost pet has been found, for example. I mean, we want to celebrate that. Absolutely. I just don't call that an answered prayer, because to me, the prayer is answered in the consciousness that gets the understanding and then moves in action. That's the answer to prayer. So I'm just as uncomfortable with the sort of feeling like it's only answered if we got what we want.
I mean, it's interesting. It's one of the things we talk about in, so originally the book started out, we wanted to write a book about praying with others. And what happened was we realized that first people needed to have their own personal prayer life before they could really pray with others. And in order to have your own personal prayer life, you needed to understand these foundational principles that are the undergirding of what affirmative prayer rests upon. But one of the things we talk about in some of the challenges when you're praying with other people is this idea that your prayer is there to fix them or fix it, or that idea that somehow that rests on the person. I mean, it's why we're so clear about saying, I'm praying with you. I don't pray for you. You are an active participant in this process. And that being the active participant is how prayer, quote unquote, gets answered. And that there's no need for me to fix you, because when I'm in the prayer field, I see that you're whole and perfect. And that's what I am reflecting back to you, your wholeness, your perfection, the truth of who you are. And so there is nothing to fix. There is only the remembering. And it's subtle, but it's huge, the difference, because one disempowers people. It makes them feel as if they don't have the capacity, but this prayer chaplain has the capacity, or this minister has the capacity, but I don't have the capacity. And that is not what we teach in Unity. Greater things than these shall you do if for each of us, not just the ones who are special, right? All of us have the ability to do this. And so that for me is one of the main things to just continue to invite prayer when we're praying with others into is you're not fixing someone. You're not praying for them. You're reminding them of something that they've always had. They don't even have to become it or get it. They already are it. They just have to remember it.
Yeah. Subtle but huge maybe should have been the subtitle of the book. The adjustment to affirmative prayer is subtle but huge.
Yes.
And one of the things I really loved about the book was your use of language and the way that you explain some of the rainbows and lollipops, unthinking sort of jargon that we sometimes use, how to shift that in a subtle but huge way. Things like God's in charge, or I'll just go to my heart and the words will flow. I'll just go with the flow. Tell me some more. Tell me 2 or 3 things that you really wish people would say differently.
Go ahead, Linda.
I did see one thing in the chat, one question about how what we do is different from Leilani Burt's training. And I think I'll start with that because I know a lot of people have come away with the thought that if I just leave my head and go to my heart, whatever comes out is divine, right? It's inspired and it's God speaking kind of thing. And I'm all for that, but only after I've really encountered a lot of education, because what comes out is what I've learned. You know what I mean? Like if you haven't had any Buddhist training, Buddhist words don't come out of your mouth, right? If you, right. Whatever tradition you've had, whatever whatever has been you've been indoctrinated. That's probably a really bad word for it, but whatever you've taken in and has been modeled for you, that's what comes out of your mouth when you pray with somebody. It might be inspired, but is it true? That's always the question. And so for us, the idea is, your head and your heart have to work together, and you have to practice, study and practice to get good at being able to extemporaneously open your heart and let your words flow. Because ultimately we want our words to flow, but they have to be educated. Your heart has to be educated. All right. So that's what I'll say about that.
I can give my testimony on that, because when I was in ministerial school trying to learn to pray out loud, the Unity way, the prayer was the last place I was able to change my language. Mm-hmm. I could give a talk or write a paper, and I had made the adjustments there, but when I started to pray, the Baptist church was still coming out. Mm-hmm. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but I wanted to learn this new way of praying affirmatively, and it took a lot of practice. And I'm still not especially good at it. Linda's really good at it. That's why we always ask her to pray at the start of a meeting or something. Gosh, we're almost out of time. There's a lot of chat going on. People are buying the book. People who have taken your class are saying it's wonderful and everybody else should take it. Thank you for buying the book. And I hope you will take the class, because there's just so much more to go into here than we possibly can tonight. We haven't talked about spiritual bypassing. We haven't talked about weeing. It's when you pray that we will be healed and we will get what we want. See, they have opinions about this.
There's so much.
Yes, please buy the book, take the class.
And I just want to say that the book has practices. After every chapter, there's practices, there's reflection questions, there's we really wrote it to be something that could be very embodied and hands-on. That really was our intention. And we're also working on a study guide, which should be out very soon. And that will be available and on our website, discoveryourdivinity.net, once we get that finished. But we will have a study guide, a 6-week study guide for people who want to use this with classes or with groups or book study groups, that sort of thing. So that is coming.
Yes. So we may have about 5 more minutes. I wanted to cover one more thing. You said you started out wanting to write a book about praying with others. And we do that in Unity. Ministers do it, chaplains do it. We have special training for chaplains. And in religious science, your background, DeeAnn, they have practitioners who spend a couple of years learning how to pray with others. So why was that important to you to include in the book? Because I'm just thinking it's a fairly small percentage of people who will actually be in that role. But
I don't know.
One of the things, I was praying with other people well before I became a licensed practitioner. I was engaged in the activity of prayer with others, whether it was through the classes that I was taking. You always had a prayer partner. I was supporting other people in my community. I would like to debunk this idea that you need to have some sort of higher certification in order to be able to pray affirmatively, that it's available to all of us. And like Linda said, it's just a process of stepping in and learning about it and growing into it. And while being a prayer chaplain is incredible, or being a practitioner is amazing, because I am one, and being a minister is awesome, for lay people, I think this is one of the most powerful ways that you can transform your life and support the people around you.
Sure. And lots of people don't really have any intention of being formal about praying with others, but they've got family members. And even if they don't pray out loud with others, to have a way of holding that person in prayer, to understand what's going on, that's really very valuable. But I will just tell you, I have a heart for prayer chaplains and leaders in ministry. Why? Because that's what I've primarily been doing through these last dozen years. When I go to churches, I typically meet with the prayer teams and do training with them. And I have seen a real hunger from these teams for something that they could study at depth, to do 3 to 6 hours with me. They get a start, but to have a text, to have something that they can refer to and go back to and work on together is really just really helpful. And it's been my desire to have something like this for a long time. And frankly, we can only go so many places. DeeAnn has full-time ministry now. And while I'm free, I can only do so many events a year, right? I'm still doing that. I love to go to clusters of Unity communities where several communities get together and we can do a really great training weekend. I love nothing more than that. It's my favorite thing in the world to do. So but I can only do so much of that for real. And so could DeeAnn. And so to have this in writing and have it available for study. Now we're going to look at maybe offering some things online from time to time, maybe for people who want to get further enrichment, stuff like that. But look, to have the basics there and then have the study materials that we're going to be offering at no charge for people to be able to avail themselves of that and to use it. And that's what we wrote this for.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to have to stop there.
Yeah.
But if you all want more, the class is actually on Wednesday nights. I think I said Tuesday. It's on Wednesday nights in October. And so you've got the link to that in the chat. You can sign up for that. Thank you so much for joining us, Linda and DeeAnn. Thank you to all of you watching. Thanks to our chat moderators who were answering your questions and giving me some of your questions. Mm-hmm. Our next book, which is not out just yet, will be 100 Years of Daily Word. We are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Daily Word in 2024. And we'll be doing lots of things through the year, but the book is the first thing. It should be here in the middle of October. So watch for that. We'll do an event like this on that book probably next spring. But meanwhile, Discover Your Divinity, A Modern Guide to Affirmative Prayer, is available on Kindle or in the Unity store. I think you have the links in the chat, and we're going to give you a QR code if you want to get your phone ready, and that will take you to the book as well. Phew, this has been great. Thank you so much for doing it, and I hope you all will join us again for Unity Books Presents.
Thank you, everyone.